A wail from within a dark temple echoes across the fallen kingdom of Hallownest. A stranger emerges from beyond the frontier, a vessel of possibility. The cry beckons the itinerant knight, though whether a plea or warning is uncertain. What the knight finds is beyond imagining. Eternal Hallownest, realm of the Pale King, haven for bug and beast, the greatest civilization known, is in its death throes. Beset by strange occurrences, overrun by ravenous creatures, and victim to a mysterious plague, little life remains. The king and his guardians have disappeared into myth, and the great cities lie in ruin. The first chapter of the knight's story opens in the kingdom's final, told in twilight. Hallownest is a rotting corpse, its light and memory quickly fading. The knight must uncover the kingdom's secrets, learn its inhabitants' fate, and fight against a relentless force to reclaim the realm's lost glory. This is the story of Hollow Knight. Before Hallownest, before bugs, before ambition or religion, there was power. Fundamental energies clashed with one another in a primordial torrent. From them came time, reality, and various planes of existence, both physical and ethereal. The dream realm formed as a timeless plane of light and creation, shaped by memory. The fundamental energy of the dream realm manifests in essence. Essence, the precious fragments of light that dreams are made of. It can be found wherever dreams take root. Essence is the material of consciousness and thought. It's the spirit that guides living creatures, and it is their memories. The dream realm was once united, but in ages long past, a rend split it in two, and the nightmare realm emerged. None can say with certainty how or why this happened. Even the moth tribe's seer has limited knowledge. But the expansive dream in past was split. One realm now must stay apart. Essence of dream, like light, floats bright in little motes, while the essence of nightmare burns like fickle flames. Dream essence stands as a creature's aspirations, while nightmare essence sits as their fears. The dream realm lies imperceptibly atop the physical world, separated only by a thin veil. The physical realm is composed of all things tangible and living. The fundamental energy associated with this realm is soul, the breath of life. It is the vital force that animates the various races of bug and beast. While essence can be thought of as a being's consciousness and memory, soul is its life force. It can also be harnessed to generate powerful spells or mend wounds. The abyss, the third realm known, is inherently opposed to the dream realm's light. It is a place of perpetual darkness, hopeless and beyond desire. Like a black hole, it consumes without mercy. From this place, the fundamental energy void coalesced. Also referred to as shadow or darkness, this substance is amorphous and chaotic. It lashes out at anything with essence or soul and drains them of it. But a strong will can dominate this energy and direct its form or purpose. Whether the void naturally comes from the abyss or comes from another plane of existence is uncertain. But if the latter is true, perhaps the abyss exists in the shadow of that plane's influence. The fundamental energies soon gave rise to legendary entities called higher beings that embodied their characteristics. Higher beings have godlike powers and influence that sets them above all other known creatures. They are unique, each different in their abilities from one another. The Radiance, a moth-like creature of essence, shines bright with dreams and desires. She is an entity of the dream realm. The nightmare realm sustains the higher being called the nightmare's heart, a terror of sleep, the deepest power inhabiting the darkest reaches of the nightmare realm. Troops are slaves to its will and travel to lands of dying kingdoms. From their corpses, flames are collected to sustain the nightmare and preserve the eternal ritual. The greater mind, is a being whose immense power connected dream to the physical realm and allowed her to shape thoughts into reality. Other higher beings came to be. Their strength molded the primal landscape, and their nature compelled them to seek out lesser races over which to rule. The eventual arrival of both the pale Wyrm and much later the god Seeker to Hallownest support a form of mutualistic relationship between higher beings and bugs. Higher beings crave followers who worship them as divine, while bugs desire a strong entity on whom they can lavish their devotion. In exchange for supplication, higher beings elevate bugs, empower them to establish cultures, or protect their civilizations from threats without and within. The higher being then draws strength from zealous faith. As we will soon see with the Radiants, when severed from their line of devotion, a higher being is often stripped of much of its power. Likewise, the old gods of thunder and rain, who hail from the distant land of storms, demonstrate that when these divine entities die or disappear, the bugs suffer. To have a deity believed all-powerful vanish can be quite a shock to mortals, and as the land of storms falls to godless ruin, we hear the anguish in the lament of the God-seekers. Gods of thunder, gods of rain, why forsake thy servants? Will our minds be left suffering to ache alone? What God remains to deliver us from this woeful silence? Thus the greater led the lesser, and history began. Deep within the earth, where light can't penetrate and silence is a force unto itself, an ancient race of bugs discovered the void. They were forever changed. Inspired or mad, those ancient bugs, they devoted their worship to no lord or power or strength, but to the very darkness itself. This devotion was rewarded, and through the void's power the bugs established an ancient, flourishing civilization that spread out from the abyss. Not much is known of the ancient civilization's origin or structure, but this enigmatic race's dominion predates Hallownest by many generations. It was secured via their knowledge of the void, and their ability to channel its chaotic nature into unified forms shaped by will. As they expanded, the bugs took an interest in the fundamental energy of soul, and sought to master it as they had the void. They pursued several experiments to unlock its secrets. Remnants of these endeavors are seen in the soul totems that litter Hallownest. As the relic seeker Lem states, you may have come upon them, those old statues that seem a store for soul. They too prove the ancient race's existence, though in a larger, cruder form. Perhaps formed or fueled by void, the soul totems act as stores for soul and might depict some creatures of the ancient civilization itself, or their imagined idols. With soul mastered and void revered, the civilization flourished, crafting superb weapons, charging powerful spells, and forever expanding their borders. The ancient race preserved their wisdom inside arcane eggs. These mysterious jet-black stones are believed to hold layers of inscriptions, records, journals, all bound within a durable outer shell. The arcane eggs may contain more than just thoughts. Through their manipulation of both soul and void, the bugs of the ancient race could have imprinted their own spirit or attached fragments of their essence onto these artifacts. Many historians claim that a subtle power emanates from the arcane eggs, that a will of sorts exists within each egg, that each seeks its own bearer or rejects them. These ghosts of the ancient civilization are accompanied by desiccated husks found in Hallownest's farthest reaches. The corpses are quite varied, but all represent strange beasts not seen amongst the living, with massive bodies, unearthed in places such as Queen's Garden, Kingdom's Edge, and of course, the Abyss. Most fascinating of all is the mystery surrounding the civilization's collapse. Just as it had been born from obscurity, to it the ancient race returned, and little records the nature of its demise. Whether doom was suddenly unleashed or a slow, painful decline marked its death can only be speculated. What is certain is that not even power of the void and mastery of soul could prevent the inevitable. All things, no matter how great, must come to an end. The disappearance of the ancient civilization allowed other bug cultures to rise. Small tribes claimed favorable tracts of land, while others adopted nomadic lifestyles. Though this occasionally brought friction, the regions of bug and beast that followed the ancient race were plentiful. The higher being Un descended, united dream and reality when she gave birth to the lush green path. Rocky tunnels and depleted wastes in an instant transformed into verdant gardens where plants flourished, a serene oasis of beauty and life beneath the earth. Un also dreamt of supplicants which manifested in the Moskin tribe. The green children walked from the dream unto these lands. The tribe developed a sophisticated society and a religion centered around Un, whom they refer to as the Greater Mind. They erected a place of worship near the lake from which she would occasionally emerge. The Moskin tended their god's garden while they awaited her foretold return to once more join her in the dream. Moss Knights trained in nail combat patrolled their greenscape, and the community's overall health was tied to the vigor of the vegetation. Besides Un, one other higher being descended during this time to shape reality and cultivate devotion. The Radiance is a creature of dream, desire, and promise. She is bound to the dream realm and the spiritual element of essence. So entwined with the dream is she that the line between corporeal and ethereal becomes blurred. Though she might have projected an aura into the waking world, it seems the Radiance exists in the dream, the seat of her power. Like Un, the Radiance is believed to have created her own worshippers in the form of the Moth tribe, and the seer, last member of the Moths, tells us that the folk of my tribe were born from a light similar to essence, though much brighter still. They were content to bask in that light and honored it. As a creature of divine light, suffused with essence, the Radiance is directly opposed to the Abyss, whose void energy is anathema to her existence, and what she describes as her ancient enemy. A great conflict between fire and shadow, dream and void, spirit and a hollow emptiness. Like a brilliant sun, the Moths basked in the warmth of their god's embrace, and the Radiance gifted them the power to manipulate the dream. They channeled essence to craft charms, shields, dream catchers, and the dream nail, a weapon that could pierce the veil between planes and allow its users access to the dream realm. Largely pacifists, the Moths cared only for the reverence of their god and the preservation of their ancestral memories. They carefully tended the graves and shrines that held the spirits of their departed. Now, there's some room left open for speculation on the Radiance's origins. Some claim that instead of creating the Moths, it was instead their power over dream and their collective imagination that shaped the Radiance into existence. They were alone and defenseless in a wild land. Their desire for a protector and god created such an entity that even bears a likeness to the Moths. In any event, the Radiance emerged and influenced the physical realm through her followers. Not all tribes owed their creation or protection to a higher being. Lurking within the toxic fumes of the fungal wastes, bands of proud mantis warriors looked to their own for stability. They carved out their domain through conquest and blood. For the mantis tribe, conflict was a way of life, and they constantly warred with creatures of the wastes. Martial prowess determined leadership roles. The most respected mantis were the greatest warriors, and those outsiders who proved sufficient in combat earned the tribe's respect. Violence was frequent for the mantis tribe, who fought the darker beasts that emerged from the wilds of Deep Nest. Here, where nightmares are given form and horrors lurk in dark corners, the arachnoid spider tribes erected a secret bastion, protected by isolation. Several groups or castes make up the spiders of Deep Nest. Not originally native, the weavers traveled from their distant homeland and established a small den and kingdom in the west. They were a highly intelligent and advanced race, so named for their ability to weave stories, shields, spells, and many other things on their looms of spider silk. Other, more primitive spiders also patrolled filamentous webs. All were united in their devotion towards the king and queen of spiders. We know frustratingly little of the king, but a lore tablet in the fungal wastes claims he was of an honored and elevated caste, while his queen Hera was nothing more than a common beast. Creatures beyond the kith and kin of bugs also developed complex cultures in the past. One such being the mushroom clans that now dominate the fetid ponds of the fungal wastes. The mushrooms aren't quite bug and not exactly plant, but something uniquely in between. They found strength in the shared self, strength in the mind united, sharing a hive mentality that allowed for rapid communication and coordinated defense of their borders. They were quite xenophobic and territorial, aggressively attacking any interlopers. A small tribe of reserved snails developed an affinity for soul that hadn't been seen since the collapse of the ancient civilization. Their shamans became master spellcrafters that could draw soul from their surroundings, and even from other living creatures, to fuel both spellcraft and charm fashioning. A great majority of bugs, however, existed without awareness. They lacked sentience, identity, or higher thought, and so remained in a wild state, preoccupied only with instinctual survival. Husks, centipedes, flies, and many others blindly stumbled in the world, unguided by a higher being. So it was that the ancient world lived, a delicate harmony struck between all who dwelt within. But the balance would be forever disrupted, as power from beyond the horizon shuttered the landscape. A higher being, attracted to the bugs of the various tribes and kingdoms, arrived to impress its will. An ancient race of massive creatures, possessed of unparalleled physical and magical ability, once traveled the world. These creatures were known as the Great Wyrms. We are told that worms pull bugs into their thrall, till ages pass and kingdoms fall. Like other higher beings, they either create or find supplicants, and it would seem worms are skilled at enthralling the minds of lesser beings, tying bugs to their own will. Worms are purported to have both prescience and future sight. They use this power to establish great civilizations, building nations that surpass the capacity of bugs. But for a race that can pierce the furthest reaches of time, there is one enemy they cannot outmaneuver or escape: mortality. The worms, though godlike, aren't immune to time's passing, and so many seek through various means a way of achieving immortality, of transcending nature. To our knowledge, no worm has achieved such a feat. All have fallen to the crushing march of eternity. The passing of ages, of the worm's life cycle, of the rise and inevitable collapse of the kingdoms they create, is doomed to repeat endlessly. As the seer states, "As history goes on, I grow numb to its repetitions." Now, whether the worms establish empires and exploit their enthralled subjects to fuel rituals of immortality, or whether they do so to fulfill their base purpose, is unclear, but many have crumbled to dust through the generations. The last known member of this race, the pale worm, journeyed through mountains and across desolate wastes until it arrived on the frontier of bug kind, in its death throes. Mold and ash fall from its carapace, which lurches to rest on what will come to be Kingdom's edge. Though death is its mortal enemy, the pale worm is not so easily defeated. As it undergoes physical decay, it also undergoes spiritual consolidation and a rekindling of soul. This ashen place is grave of worm. Once told, it came to die. But what is death for that ancient being? More transformation, methinks. This failed kingdom is product of the being spawned from that event. The being Bardoon refers to is none other than the Pale King, the reincarnation of the pale worm. Deep within the husk of the worm, in cast-off shell, we find remnants of the egg from which the Pale King hatched in its new regnal form. Upon reaching the realm, it saw opportunity in the bugs, a culture to rule, a people to lead, and a religion to dominate, especially those bugs that were godless and without complex thought. To better enmesh itself with these creatures, the worm cast off its great form, assumed a more diminutive but no less powerful body, and took the mantle of the Pale King. Using his powers, he enthralled the husks and myriad other base insects under pretense of a boon. The king bestowed sentience and expanded minds in exchange for utter devotion. The first lines of the Elegy for Hallownest describe the worm's arrival. For none could tame our savage souls, yet you the challenge met. Under palest watch, you taught, we changed, base instincts were redeemed. A world you gave to bug and beast as they had never dreamed. And this is supported further by the White Palace lore tablet. The worm becomes beacon, minds expanded to yield to devote. The Pale King demanded obeisance and promised freedom from unintelligent desires. He pulled these bugs from the darkness, brought enlightenment, and under his auspices, founded Hallownest. In a stroke, this kingdom reversed their suffering and elevated bugs from their depraved state. His magnanimity earned the Pale King thousands of willing followers, who abandoned past lives to extol their new god and savior. From the capital city, at this time called Hallownest's heart, the kingdom flourished, expanding through conversion, coercion, and conquest. The Pale King's sometimes brutal acts to secure hegemony and the reverence given to him by bugs is reminiscent of an ancient Roman quote. They called it in their ignorance civilization, but it was really part of their enslavement. Immediate challenges presented themselves. First, he had to subdue, annex, or eradicate those insects who refused to acknowledge his rule. The slinking spider clans and horrid beasts of Deepnest staunchly opposed Hallownest and came to blows on several occasions with the rapidly expanding kingdom. After protracted conflict, the Pale King turned to the Mantis tribes for alliance. This proud clan of warriors had also resisted Hallownest's encroachment, but brokered a deal with the king's emissaries in which they retained independence and in exchange vowed to act as a buffer state, a first line of defense to control the aggression emanating from Deepnest. The mushrooms and the fungal wastes were likewise united in their contempt for the horrors of Deepnest, and promised fealty to the Pale King for protection. Warily shall we accept the will of the Wyrm, its prescience shields us, fate and future we shall entwine. The collection of bees known as the Hive opposed the king but used a less violent tact. Instead, they erected large barriers of beeswax and sequestered themselves within their isolated colony, free from the Pale King's enthralling beacon. But so dazzled by the king's majesty and elevated by his hand that most bugs willingly swore oaths of subservience and carried the banner of Hallownest into a mercurial golden age. As the Pale King's influence expanded from its heart, its frontiers butted against cults devoted to the worship of other higher beings. The great mind of inoculated her Mosskin against the king's enthralling aura, but they established agreeable terms. The Mosskin would allow roads to be built along the green path, but those who strayed from the White King's roads shall face the law of The Radiance, with her base of power in the Dream Realm, proved difficult to confront directly, as did the assimilation of her Moth tribe worshippers. The Pale King's influence awed the moths and lured them into his aura. Like the Radiance, the Wyrm exuded a brilliant light that transfixed and instilled devotion. The moths, either willing or unwilling, ended their faith in the Radiance in favor of the Pale King, cutting her off from invigorating power. For the moths, another light appeared in our world, a worm that took the form of a king. How fickle my ancestors must have been. They forsook the light that spawned them, turned their backs to it, forgot it even. And so this kingdom was born from that betrayal. As members of Hallownest, the moths offered their skill in ancestral worship, preservation of memory, and solemn duty over the dead. They were given as fief the resting grounds, a place of reflection and respite where those of the kingdom went for burial. After the moth's transgression, the Radiance's glow died out in the minds of bugs. She faded from memory and seemingly existence. But as mentioned, higher beings do not so easily die. Eventually, the Wyrm assumed not just the mantle of king, but also of god. The bugs whom he elevated praised him. Even his detractors would begrudgingly admit the king's power far outstripped any mortal bug. The extent of the Pale King's cult of worship is seen in the relics, statues, and signs across Hallownest bearing his visage. And to prove his primacy, as first among the gods, he may have even fashioned his kingdom's crest on that of the ancient civilization, insinuating falsely that he had been here since time immemorial. The ancient egg does bear a striking resemblance to Hallownest's seal. With none left to oppose him, the Pale King ushered in a golden age of development and abundance for the bugs of Hallownest. Even those from beyond were drawn to Hallownest's bright allure, and the population swelled. The capital became the lifeblood of the kingdom. Here, great palaces and estates were built by the aristocracy, while those low-born could ply their trades or sell their wares. New regions were annexed, extending the kingdom's influence, and were connected like blood vessels to the beating heart of the city by stagways and tram stations. Such transportation and commercial ventures reached as far as the suffocating darkness of Deep Nest. Mines opened in the crystal peaks to harvest wealth and strange minerals imbued with soft power. These crystals energized the kingdom. Hallownest bustled with industry and glowed with nurtured creativity. Land beyond the kingdom's borders remained a desolate waste. These blasted plains stretch never-ending. There is no world beyond. Those foolish enough to traverse this void must pay the toll and relinquish the precious mind this kingdom grants. Those who left its boundaries slowly lost the sentience granted them by their king. Those few who returned often did so without their memories. A subtle reminder that the founder of Hallownest was gracious and life before him was brutishly short. To cement his dynasty, the Pale King soon sought the hand of a queen and found one in the White Lady, another pale creature and higher being. Their union was symbolized in the forging of the king's soul charm, and their relationship defines the height of Hallownest. The nobility of the kingdom was made greater by the dubbing of 5 mythical knights, heroes of legend from within and without Hallownest that united to defend the realm and its rulers against all foes. To maintain their image of divinity, the royal couple ruled largely in absentia. The queen often took to her gardens. Once a part of Greenpath, she forcefully seized from the Mosskin, where she tended new life. The king, meanwhile, constructed the brilliant White Palace far from the capital and from prying eyes, in the depths of the ancient basin. This location not only afforded privacy, but it brought the Pale King nearer to the remnants of the ancient civilization, the power of the void, and a discovery that would change the fate of Hallownest. It's hard to dispel the myth surrounding the Pale King. Logs of his actions are extremely biased and hide his deeper motivations. As mentioned, the king had foresight, and his envisioned fate remained unchanged despite his efforts: that he would die. The Wyrm was interested in transcending mortality, in breaking the cycle of time and becoming its master. He constructed his palace in the bowels of the kingdom because of an interest in the ancient civilization. In the abyss, he rediscovered the raw power and chaos of the void that had rested dormant for generations. Like the Radiance, the Pale King was a creature of bright light, who rightly feared the void, but he was also seduced by its potential. He learned that its aggression could be subdued for a time under the harsh scrutiny of a bright light, including his own. The king built a lighthouse over the void sea to quell the seething storm and acquire samples of the substance to observe and experiment within his workshop. Void, yours is the power opposed, but yours is potential, eternity potential, force that could deny time. Void, harness shall be placed upon you. As a higher being, the Pale King had immense resolve. He learned to direct the void, bind it to his will, harness it. From his workshop, he created the king's mold, guard constructs of Hallownest's palace, and skilled wielders of the curved claw blade. Their plate mail was filled with void. The king's mold patrolled the vast halls of the White Palace and were completely bound to the king's will. Far greater than armed guards, the void promised eternity potential and a means by which the Pale King could deny his mortality. It's plausible he intended to create a sphere around Hallownest, a bubble insulating it from time through the void's abyssal power. He promised his subjects eternal splendor, eternal glory, and for himself he sought eternal life. The Pale King's success in his experimentation is hinted at through various dialogues which often use the words eternal and eternity to describe the kingdom, down to its very bones. But it also mentions that a great stagnation and stasis befalls Hallownest, as though time itself has stopped. There are conflicting accounts given by bugs that fray the strands of continuity. Some claim to be old or learned, and yet know nothing of relatively recent events. Some bugs seem to have outlived even a generous lifetime, which could be taken as proof of the king's achievement, or else a terrible failure that ended up destabilizing the natural progression. And so disgruntled was the beehive by this use of void that they sequestered themselves from the rest of Hallownest. Their hive queen Vespa states that though this hive exists within Hallownest, we play no part in its attempt at perpetuation. But a significant price must be paid for such power. The Pale King, in his unerring quest for self-preservation, supplanted another higher being. In the farthest reaches of the mind, a force, long forgotten, gathered strength. From beyond the physical, from beyond the tangible, the Pale King's rival returned. The Radiance prepared for retribution against the god that slighted her, and against the subjects that turned their backs to her. Caught in the roiling vengeance between higher beings, the bugs of Hallownest were ill prepared for what was unleashed. The rise of the pale beings cast the Radiance into shadow, and without her moth tribe she was banished to the dream world. Though the bugs of Hallownest laud the Pale King as bringer of enlightenment and deliverer from base desires, the Radiance sees his presence as usurpation and an overthrow of the natural order. Against efforts to strike her from the histories, traces of the banished god's presence lingered in Hallownest, weathered statues and overgrown temple mounts. One such relic was rediscovered in the Crystal Peak mines. Its mystery puzzled the bugs. They began to think of the Radiance once more, to dream of her. Pulses of her memory beat under the surface in the collective subconscious of bug culture. But the memories of that ancient light still lingered, hushed whispers of faith, until all of Hallownest began to dream of that forgotten light. The Radiance used her power over the dream realm to enter the minds of bugs across Hallownest. While the citizens slept in their burrows, they were seized by fitful dreams and powerful visions. Minds were filled with a blazing glow that yearned to consume all. Dreams of the Radiance burned thought and broke will. Citizens across the kingdom reported seeing a light that urged them to embrace, that pushed them to unite with the hive mind. In their dreams, the Radiance offered protection in her warm splendor. Madness shortly followed and spread through much of the population as Hallownest descended into panic. Confusion, fear, doubt were all amplified with the coming of a disease known as the infection. The infection, called the ancient sickness by the hunter, is the physical manifestation of the Radiance's hive mind madness in the form of plague. Those creatures afflicted are broken both in body and mind. Their eyes glow a feverish orange, and they're often covered in pustules. At first, the bugs looked to their gods for protection. They turned to idols and baubles for prayer, and they performed rituals in thanks to the Pale King and White Lady. To no avail. They say that the harder you struggled against it, the more it consumed you. Victims were enslaved, their minds consumed by the Radiance, and their bodies twisted into animated puppets. Thousands perished across the kingdom in the first waves of shuddering infection. Hallownest launched quarantine and containment projects to limit the spread, but such physical efforts were futile against an insidious scourge. The kingdom's fringes were the first to be abandoned as Hallownest collapsed on itself. Many stagways and tram stations closed. The wealthy and able retreated to Hallownest's heart, hoping to ride out the infection behind the capital's sealed borders. The Pale King's power seemed outmatched. He scoured histories and journals for a remedy. His research brought the king to the abyss, that ancient and forsaken realm of darkness, wellspring of the void and seat of black power. Against a relentless foe, the Pale King's desperate search for a defense yielded a great weapon. To strike against the Radiance's light, he would wield the void, her ancient enemy. If dreams are the indulgence of thought, The void is its absence. Devoid of passion or desire, this mercurial substance represents the purity of nothingness. Rather than reflect the radiance's light and succumb to infection, the void, like a black hole, would consume it without tarnishing. The king sought to create something called a vessel, a physical shell completely hollowed out and filled with void, to not only contain the infection, but to ultimately bind its progenitor. To achieve this required great sacrifice. The Pale King and White Lady united and bore thousands as their progeny, with soul of worm, soul of root. The pair then cast their children into a deep chasm within the abyss, potentially while still in their eggs. As hundreds of their shells piled atop one another, they were lashed by void tendrils, hollowed out and filled only with its black nothingness. But to truly capture the radiance, to imprison a higher being of pure light, the Pale King required a vessel of pure darkness. No emotion could color its heart. No independent thought could cross its mind. All were weaknesses by which the radiance could corrupt or control it. Thousands of children bore the king's scrutiny and fell short, their broken shells cast back into the abyss. A mountain of corpses littered across the floor, where haunting black spirits yet linger. Finally, one vessel was judged to be pure, devoid of any vestige of will, a being completely immune to the radiance's power. The Pale King took this vessel under his wing, where it would be raised and groomed for its purpose. No mind to think, no will to break, no voice to cry suffering, born of God and void. The Hollow Knight, salvation of Hallownest and prison of the Radiance. With its birth, the Wyrm sealed the birthplace, the refuse and regret of its creation, with the king's brand. The Pale King brought the young vessel from the abyss and into the White Palace, where he oversaw its maturation. To trap the radiance within its empty dreamscape required strength and skill. The king taught the vessel much, of the grand kingdom, of the ancient plague, of knightly valor and kingly duty, and the sacrifices necessary to preserve their glorious Hallownest. The pair grew inseparable in court and study. They shared a bond whose filigree tendrils, in time, strengthened to steel. The Hollow Knight learned of its charge in containing the radiance and of a king desperate to save his crumbling realm. With no voice, it unwaveringly accepted its fate. This was only one part of the Pale King's plan. The other required the aid of three powerful beings to weave a seal of binding that would preserve the Hollow Knight in eternal slumber, with the radiance forever trapped in the vessel's dreamscape. The trio were known as the Dreamers, for they too had to join the Hollow Knight in rest. Lurien the Watcher looked over the capital city, the City of Tears, from high atop his tower, and ensured the realm's safety. His voice was greatest in championing the Pale King's reign. He was the most devoted of the Dreamers, and out of great loyalty accepted his king's request. Sleep beckons eternal, and these words become my last. Though my gaze shall no longer fall upon this city, I will act forever in its protection. For king, for bug, for Hallownest, I head now to my rest. That rest is ensured by the Watcher Knights, who confront all threats and interlopers. Monomon, the teacher, was an industrious scientist. Her brilliant mind opened many discoveries during Hallownest's golden age and helped the kingdom flourish. Her chief research facility was housed deep within the mists of Fog Canyon. As keeper of the archives, Monomon wished to preserve knowledge and the future. Despite accepting the king's plan, she kept a secret for future contingencies. Monomon's mask was charged with mystical power and arcane wisdom. She bestowed it to Quirrell, her pupil, before sending him into the wilds beyond Hallownest. The mask would protect Quirrell from the mental and physical erosion of the wastes beyond, and upon her call he would return to Hallownest, if necessary to break the seal of the Black Egg. Hera, the Beast and final Dreamer, was wife to the king of Deepnest. Following his death, she became queen of the Spider tribes, and as such often conflicted with the Pale King. never fully accepting Hallownest's rule. But Hera's husband died without giving her an heir, and the beast desired to continue her bloodline through a child of her own. She only accepted the Pale King's request after he promised her a daughter, which we can glean from her Dreamnail dialogue. Bound, for brood, for child, fair bargain made, give all for her. Hornet, the intrepid guardian of Hallownest, is the product of their union. Unfortunately, Hera spent a little time with her child before duty compelled her to join the other two dreamers. As the king's plan came to fruition, his hollow child was prepared. In the Temple of the Black Egg, it slept. It offered to the Radiance its dreamscape, which the higher being quickly entered. With the lure taken, the Pale King sprang his trap. The Hollow Knight captured the Radiance within its body. Then, in the ancient temple, the Knight was itself bound in the vestibule of the Black Egg. The three dreamers quickly stamped their seals on the egg's surface, bound it, and fell into deep sleep. On bated breath, the entirety of Hallownest waited. Then, change followed. It was a success. The plague that consumed thousands calmed. The minds of bugs were once more their own. Hallownest was spared and its creatures no longer dreamt of the terrible, blinding light. Citizens in the capital erected a magnificent fountain depicting this moment to honor their champions and forever remember both the Hollow Knight and the Dreamer's sacrifice. It reads, "Memorial to the Hollow Knight in the black vault far above. Through its sacrifice, Hallownest lasts eternal." The Pale King was worshipped more fervently than before, a god who gave his own child to spare the kingdom from the Radiance. Though critically wounded, Hallownest hobbled on and attempts were made to reopen travel, to reclaim the abandoned frontiers, and to resettle. But this would not be the end of Hallownest's suffering. A critical flaw, overlooked, led to disaster. The Hollow Knight, deemed pristine, devoid of desire or emotion, had been indelibly stained. Its supposed strength was ill-judged. It was tarnished by an idea instilled. The bond between the knight and king during its intimate apprenticeship seeded within the vessel a kernel of thought and passionate will. A sense of pride or filial love touched the Pale King's heart. Despite his best efforts, it manifested within the Hollow Knight. This idea, no matter how insignificant, was a chink in the knight's armor, rendered it less than hollow, less than pure, and therefore susceptible to the Radiance's influence. It was a seed the higher being immediately latched onto and slowly corrupted. Whether through compassion or hubris, the Pale King was blind to his mistake. It was too late. With febrile haste, the Radiance pushed against her prison and through the Hollow Knight's faltering cracks, once more extended her aura. The second outbreak of infection was far more subtle than the first, suggesting the strength of the Hollow Knight and that the Dreamer's bonds still held. Again, the Radiance attacked first through dream. Bugs were once more visited by a blinding light of overwhelming splendor that called to them for union and devotion. The bugs of Hallownest were twisted out of shape by that ancient sickness. First they fell into deep slumber, then they awoke with broken minds, and then their bodies started to deform. As the dream strengthened, afflicted bugs were enslaved to the Radiance's will, stripped of identity or autonomy. Hallownest's mental deterioration was followed by the physical sickness that attacked the body. Bug shells grew bloated, husks became mangled, the eyes of victims burned out and were replaced by the orange glow. Eventually, the infection burst from their bodies in orange growths and sacs of rancid, sickly sweet-smelling liquid. The plague emitted spores that wafted through cities and stagways, making it all the more virulent. The air became liquid, liquid became flesh, and the flesh came to life. The Radiance's infection was undiscerning. Just as it infected live bugs, it reanimated the corpses of those who perished. Again, the Pale King first sought to contain the infection. Royal decree shut down the tram stations, closed the stagways, and sealed the capital from many peripheral zones. This amounted to little more than a delaying tactic. The king, needed time to develop a response, but each passing day left hundreds dead or else completely enthralled to the Radiance. We hear their crazed oration in the Moss Prophet. Light is life, beaming, pure, brilliant. To stifle that light is to suppress nature. Nature suppressed distorts, plagues us. Embrace light, achieve union. As more bugs achieve this hive mind union with the Radiance, it would be safe to speculate that the Pale King's own power waned. Higher beings require devotion to empower themselves and are ennobled by the faith of their supplicants. With fewer bugs to draw strength, the king was greatly diminished. Order quickly dissolved. The bugs clamored for the protection of their god, but just as mysteriously as the Pale King appeared, he and his indomitable white palace disappeared. As Hallownest fell to ruin, its reclusive king abandoned his subjects and went into hiding. This mystery is furthered when Relic Seeker Lem observes that there was no apparent act of violence or trace left. The king and palace simply vanished. This marks the ultimate demise of the great kingdom of Hallownest. Some continued to beseech their absent ruler, but many bugs were forced to rely on their own efforts to spare themselves from infection. The sorcerers and scientists of the Soul Sanctum attempted to counteract one fundamental energy with another, so experimented with Soul to mitigate the Radiance's power over Essence. Information on the Soul Master relates that they hoarded Soul, hoping to stave off Hallownest's affliction, but eventually became intoxicated by its power. Thousands perished in their failed experimentation, and the infection consumed the sanctum. The fungal waste provided its own environmental protection to the creatures that lived within. Its toxic fumes killed off much of the plague's spores. The Mantis tribe, with their high intelligence and their strength of will, adamantly resisted the Radiance's call in their dreams. The deposed Mantis Lord and his traitor followers, however, willfully embraced the plague. The infection offered increased strength and aggression at the cost of one's will. It is an empty hope, a false promise, but the Lord was seduced and betrayed his sisters. For his actions, he was banished. The bees and their hive queen feared the Radiance and hoped that their sealed entry would last. But following Queen Vespa's death, the already hive-minded species quickly succumbed to the Radiance's influence. Not even the king's 5 great knights slowed the spreading infection. The knights defend against the physical, but a formless enemy. How to defeat such a foe? This was the question that consumed the Pale King and spurred him to retreat into the White Palace to continue his experiments with void energy. The exact motive remains shrouded in speculation, but the king used what little power remained in him to move his bastion entirely to the Dream Realm. Some claim it was to save his labs and himself from the Radiance's wrath, a gamble to save time by removing himself from the physical world and plumb for answers. Others claim it was to hide from a monstrosity of his own making. We must remember that the Pale King is still a being of light, a natural enemy of the void, and that only by necessity and ambition was he driven to wield its power. As his strength withered, the Pale King may have been unable to control the void. Or perhaps its own insidious aura seeped into his mind, so, horrified, he fled into dream. Regardless, one thing is certain. Shortly after the Pale King's disappearance, the entirety of Hallownest crumbled to ruin. The citizens were abandoned in their hour of need and fell. One ray of hope for this forsaken land glimmers in a most peculiar place. A small light flickers in the abyss. From the heap of discarded vessels and abandoned children, a figure emerges and escapes its birthplace. Through abandoned tunnels and uncharted passageways, it scurries to the surface and leaves behind Hallownest. To travel throughout the desolate wastes surrounding the kingdom erodes memory and identity. Beyond the Pale King's influence, this vessel forgets itself. And so it is that Hallownest, the Eternal Kingdom, is sealed in doom and passes for some time. Its cities are silent, its causeways infected, its a rotting husk filled with nothing but disease and madness. But from the black egg's depths, that piercing cry rings out, perhaps a scream from the Hollow Knight to end its anguish. Its call draws the escaped vessel back from its wanderings, and this is where the journey of the night unfolds. The night arrives at Dirtmouth. Once the fringe of Hallownest, it is now the only haven offered to survivors of ruin. The single street and few buildings remind those who gather here of simpler, safer times. And indeed, several bugs make their way to this town either in passing or permanently. The vessel, drawn by the helpless plea of a broken kingdom and enkindled by its innate purpose, must brave Hallownest's overgrown paths, vacant cities, derelict stagways and hostile traps to uncover the past and alter the future. Upon descending into the forgotten crossroads, the citizen's fate is apparent. Most all bugs are crazed by infection, or else their corpses reanimated by the radiance. Few remain with their sanity intact. Some offer the night guidance, while others hamper its course. One such recurring character is Hornet, the child of Hera and the Pale King, who styles herself guardian of Hallownest's ruin. Like the night, she too heard the call. This old kingdom, a terrible thing awakens. I can smell it in the air. I know what you are. I know what you'd tried to do. I can't allow it. At first, Hornet, like many other creatures, underestimates the night and stands against it, believing that such a small vessel couldn't possibly succeed where the Hollow Knight failed. But through intrepid exploration and dauntless combat, the night gathers strength. It impresses Hornet and kindles hope within her that this vessel may truly be different. In conversation, she states that you've seen beyond this kingdom's bounds. Yours is resilience born of two voids. It's no surprise then you've managed to reach the heart of this world. The voids of which she speaks refer to the actual void present in the vessel, its birth in the abyss, but also to the greater world beyond, which is often described as a void. By traveling through the wastes, the night has liberated itself from memory, emotion, and desire, weaknesses present in all things that the radiance attacks. While the night explores the honored resting grounds, it's confronted by the ethereal projection of the dreamers. Though their power wanes, they continue a vigilant watch and feel within this vessel potential to undo the binding on the Hollow Knight's prison. They drag the night into the dream world to end its quest, but it's spared by the intervention of the Seer, the last member of the Moth tribe and original worshippers of the Radiance. The Seer is struck by something in the Knight's aura and believes they could be the fabled Wielder so long awaited. The Wielder, with the awakened power of a dream nail, represents an awesome entity with control over memory and essence. The Seer gives the dream nail to the Knight. This relic blade has the ability to slice the veil separating dream from reality and allow its wielder access to thoughts of others, as well as entry into the dream realm. This artifact is critical in fulfilling the Knight's purpose and uncovering Hallownest's forgotten memories. It's used to enter the dreamers' minds as they rest and defeat their last vestige of power. As each dreamer is slain, their power is absorbed by the Knight, and their respective seal binding entry to the Temple of the Black Egg is shattered. The Knight must destroy all three dreamers to confront the infected Hollow Knight before the Radiance's influence breaks free completely. The Seer is not the only cultish creature found within Hallownest. Deep in the junk pit of the royal waterways, the Knight uncovers a sarcophagus that binds a bug from a distant land called the Godseeker. The Godseeker is the last physical member of a race whose aim is to find beings of power and attune themselves to such entities, thus empowering the Godseeker race. At some point in time, the Godseekers merged their collective minds, and though the one uncovered in the junk pits is the last, she bears the consciousness and memories of all who have come before. The Godseeker admits that she came to Hallownest in search of the Pale King's residual aura. We feel the afterglow of the god power that sat this throne. That lingering power alone was beacon enough to draw us to Hallownest. The Godseekers created a vast hall within the dream realm called Godhome. Within, a pantheon of gods from across the lands of bug and beast dwell in dream form or else through imprint of their memory. Through ritual combat between these gods of Hallownest, the God Seekers ascend. By attuning ourselves, we clutch at their greatness, their immortality, their unknowable splendor. They keep watch for the God of gods, greatest among deities, and wish to bask in its glory. The knight's entry into Godhome enrages the God Seekers, calling the vessel a creeper and stating that the presence of such a lowly being in this divine realm is highest sacrilege. Perhaps due to its stature, its appearance, or the vacancy left by such pure void within its shell, the knight is overlooked as a potential being of power. But as it gathers strength, challenges and defeats several pantheons, the Godseeker has no choice but to acknowledge the knight's potential. Perhaps its size belies a power none could conceive. Perhaps within the knight, there is a god of gods. The Godseeker attunes as the knight bests every challenge before it, empowering the Godseeker, but through faith also strengthening the knight. Godhome and the Godseeker are critical in the end of the knight's story. If, in its exploration of the Howling Cliffs, the knight lights a brazier, a peculiar band of performers led by Troopmaster Grimm arrives on the outskirts of Dirtmouth. This contingent travels through Dream to broken kingdoms and gathers their dying flames to perform a profane ritual. As the one who lit the nightmare lantern and summoned the troop, Grimm seeks the knight's aid in collecting scarlet flames scattered across Hallownest. He gives the Grimm Child charm to the knight, which feeds on the fiery essence contained to gain strength. As the quest progresses, the troop is cast in a sinister light. Grimm and the performers are slaves to the higher being known as the Nightmare Heart. They are sent from the Nightmare Realm by their master to perform the Grimm ritual, to feed the child, burn the father, in an endless song of death and rebirth, thus invigorating the Nightmare Heart. The troop are helpless to resist. The knight can either assist in its completion or banish the troop from Hallownest before the higher being is fed. If the knight accepts its part in the Grimm ritual, and when the Grimm Child is sufficiently gorged on nightmare essence, Grimm invites the knight to a performance of skill in swordplay. The heat of battle and the passion of the ritual further strengthens the Grimm Child, which at this point burns with enough energy to consume its father. The final act of the ritual awaits in the Nightmare Realm. It's told in the whimsical score of the Grimm Troop's song. Dance and die and live forever, silent voices shout and sing. Stand before the troop's dark heart, burn away the Nightmare King. By using the Dream Nail, the knight is transported to the depths of horror and hedonism, where it confronts Grimm again, this time wreathed as the Nightmare King before the Great Heart itself. Upon defeating Grimm in the nightmare, the Grimm Child feeds off his dying energy, as does the heart. The troop leader will be reborn from the Grimm Child and perpetuate the ritual indefinitely. With their purpose fulfilled, the Grimm troop leaves Hallownest before the night awakens, vanishing like a bad dream. While it journeys, the knight also crosses paths with the White Lady, the Queen of Hallownest, who remains sealed inside a cocoon within the Queen's gardens. She retreated to her favorite place of respite after the kingdom fell to either ride out the infection or meet her end. The White Lady reveals that she had purposefully bound herself within the garden as penance for her part in creating the vessels, in bringing Hallownest's ruin, but also to prevent herself from birthing more vessels. Like Hornet, the Queen felt the chains on the Radiance loosen. Within my roots, the weakening of the vessel I plainly feel. And she anticipated the arrival of the night, though also like Hornet, she greatly underestimates its potential. She gives one half of the King Soul Charm, an artifact symbolic of the royal union and charged with power, to aid the vessel in its quest. The second half is found only with the discovery of the Pale King's fate. Deep within Ancient Basin, in the void-stained ruins of the White Palace, the knight happens upon the decayed husk of a king's mold, one of the Pale King's personal guard. Striking its body with the Dream Nail gains the knight entry into the Dream Realm and the hiding place of the Pale King. The palace takes on a shape of suffering, perhaps altered by the king's own anguish at a life of mistake. In fact, the lore tablet in the Path of Pain states that to witness secrets sealed, one must endure the harshest punishment. This could imply that the king used the power of dream to reflect his pain in the terrible traps present in the White Palace. Upon entering the throne room in the palace's heart, we come to face one of Hollow Knight's greatest mysteries, the death of the Pale King. His corpse, or at least its husk, sits unmoving on the throne. Although there are signs of a potential struggle at the doors, with king's mold littered about, no physical harm has touched the king. Some argue that here the king finally accepted fate, that he couldn't deny mortality or suppress the course of natural events, and greeted death. Others claim that the Wyrm died of a heart broken, a god who failed his disciples, a king who failed his subjects, a father who failed his son. And yet, there are signs of the Void's work present in the throne room. With his light faded, perhaps the king could no longer control the Void he sought to use against the Radiance, and was himself consumed by it, something worthy of its own video. The knight retrieves the other half of the king's soul, and with the charm united, now possesses great power. After the knight unlocks the truth of Hallownest and shows signs of a strong will, Hornet tests it atop Kingdom's edge. The vessel proves its worth, and she etches the king's brand upon its shell. Hornet held the brand in safekeeping to protect Hallownest and await one worthy. Far more than a key, whoever bears the brand assumes the mantle of king. With it, the knight gains a regal aura, and several new dialogues with the kingdom's characters reveal its ascent. The king's brand also grants access to the forbidden abyss, long ago sealed by the Pale King, and the knight's dark birthplace. The knight descends. The bottom of the chasm is littered with broken vessels. Lingering shades of fallen siblings give chase, small remnants of the Pale King's will. The abyss contains many mysteries guarded by time and the chaos of void without form. The King Soul grants access to the furthest depths, and in the birthplace chamber, a large reflective egg, jet black and cracked, rests. That place where it was born, where it died, where it began. With the dream nail, the knight enters a memory imprint that shows the tragic day of the Hollow Knight's birth, its acceptance by the Pale King, and the inevitable catastrophe that would follow. To relive such a memory, to access the abyss, to assume its power and its form, suggests that the knight might be the pure vessel sought, with the strength to contain the radiance. Or perhaps it is something more, something greater that could even confront her directly. Following this discovery, the King's soul is stained with void and becomes the Void Heart. An emptiness that was hidden within is now unconstrained. This unifies the void under the bearer's will. Acquisition of the Void Heart is symbolic of the transformation within the knight. Through its journeys and actions, it has proven that it's both sufficiently devoid of emotion or desire, and possessed of immense will to control the void. It becomes, as the Dreamnail dialogue suggests, the Lord of Shades. The siblings are rendered passive, the void tendrils no longer lash out. The knight is suffused with power. This marks the culmination of the journey. The Crucible of Hallownest has strengthened the knight's will and honed its skill. Only one action remains. Enter the Temple of the Black Egg, confront the tarnished Hollow Knight, and if not restore the kingdom to its former glory, at least spare its desolation. But will the knight succeed where its sibling faltered? Will the vessel contain the Radiance's luminous presence, binding it to the void within? Or will the knight, too, succumb as the god's aura shatters its porcelain husk? There are several endings to the knight's tale and closings to the Age of Hallownest. Each is equally considered canon, though some are more satisfying than others. The paths and choices are hinted at several times across the course of the game. Hornet tells us that she sees a chance for change within the knight. A difficult journey you would face, but a choice it can create. Prolong our world's stasis or face the heart of its infection. I'd urge you to take that harder path, but what end may come, the decision rests with you. Hornet believes Hallownest's time has passed, and the kingdom should be spared eternal stasis. But the White Lady is of a different opinion. Only two obvious outcomes there are for such a thing. The first is inevitable on current course: regression, all minds relinquished to that pernicious plague. The second I find preferable, and would seek your aid. I implore you, usurp the vessel. You could contain that thing inside. She wishes to see the Radiants perpetually bound and Hallownest spared by the ascent of a pure vessel. Despite what she claims, there are more than two endings. In fact, 5 are possible, and each depends entirely on the knight's actions. The first requires only that you defeat the Dreamers, undo their bindings, and confront the Hollow Knight within the Black Egg. After its death, the heart of the infection envelops the chamber in waves of plague. The knight focuses the infection, gathers in the radiance, and then takes the Hollow Knight's place as the new vessel. It sacrifices itself and is sealed within the Black Egg, bound to contain the radiance and to perpetuate Hallownest's eternal stasis. The remaining endings all depend on the acquisition of the Void Heart and imply its great lore significance. The second is much the same as the first, but this time Hornet intervenes and as the Hollow Knight weakens, strikes it with her needle, opening up the crack within its mask, which emits essence. Rather than striking with the Dream Nail, the knight destroys the Hollow Knight and again takes its place. Hornet is rendered unconscious and sealed within the Black Egg, and her mask is emblazoned on its surface, suggesting that she is unwillingly bound to stand as a new Dreamer, guardian of the egg, much as the Dreamers of old stood. But if instead, the knight strikes the restrained Hollow Knight with the awoken Dream Nail, it's transported to the Dream Realm and brought before the Radiance directly. This opens an opportunity to destroy the higher being entirely. As the fight progresses and the knight weakens the Radiance with waves of attacks, void seeps into the Dream Realm, and tendrils lash out at the god. She flees ever higher, but with the assistance of the Shade siblings and the Shade of the Hollow Knight, the Radiance is bound. The knight's own internal void breaks from its physical vessel to become void given form. It lashes out to deal a mortal blow. The Radiance is defeated by its ancient enemy. Its light is snuffed, and it's pulled into the abyss. Without its source, the infection that plagued Hallownest abates. This city is cleansed by void tendrils. The knight's purpose is fulfilled. Only its cracked shell remains, and its siblings return to the untamed void. Hallownest is finally broken free from the cycle of stasis and stagnation. Whether bugs will once more fall to their base nature, or another deity will come to take the king's place, is left to imagination. The last two endings involve Godhome and the God Seeker, rather than a final confrontation with the Hollow Knight in the Temple of the Black Egg. Within Godhome, the knight challenges and defeats the various pantheons, and its power grows. The Godseeker attunes to the knight, and on the back of faith, empowers its continued rise. At the summit of Hallownest's pantheon sits the Absolute Radiance, also much empowered by the attunement and belief of the Godseeker. She has come from her prison and wishes to fight to break free. Both the Knight and the Absolute Radiance possess the potential to assume the mantle God of Gods to the Godseeker. It will be decided by their ritual combat. In the Embrace the Void ending, the Knight proves greater than the Absolute Radiance. Its mask breaks, and its void essence unites with the large expanse of void that has joined it in the Dream Realm. From the shadows emerges the Void Entity, the apex Lord of Shades, and the ultimate form of void given focus by the Knight, elevated by the Godseeker. The Void Entity tears the Radiance apart until it dissolves into essence, scattered to the winds. Void then leaks from the Godseeker's dream and infects Godhome. Thick fountains fall from the sky, and as the Void Entity descends, its tendrils drag the Godseeker's dream form into darkness. Perhaps it has found the God it sought and embraced the void. In the physical realm, void leaks from a shuddering Godseeker who struggles to contain such power. Its body grows black, and void shortly erupts that consume her. Far away, in the Temple of the Black Egg, Hornet sees the remnants of infection wither, then turn black. A figure in chains shocks her as it emerges, most likely the Hollow Knight, who is now free of infection. Whether it's a friend or foe hangs heavy in these final moments. The only difference between this ending and the last is whether the knight gives the God Seeker a delicate flower. The delicate flowers are mysterious and pale, native to lands serene, far from Hallownest. They exude a pure aura of sanctity and are used in many rituals of blessing or honor. The God Seeker suggests that these petals could be from an unknown god and charged with its power. Gods, many shapes they assume. This bloom then? A splinter? Cast off? Refuse of something greater? Although the Seeker dismisses it, the true strength of this flower is realized in the final ending's cutscene. With the delicate flower in its possession, the God Seeker still seeps void from its core, but as it makes contact with the petals, both void and bug are consumed in a soft white glow. The void-tinged God Seeker vanishes to another place or another realm is up to speculation. Hollow Knight is a tragedy. It catalogs the inexorable collapse of a great kingdom, the hubris in attempting to circumvent fate, and the terrible price paid for ambition. The Pale King, despite holding immeasurable power, created the events that led to his own undoing. His and the Hollow Knight's end demonstrate that even the best laid plans are subject to the winds of time, and that there is danger in subverting nature. All things perish, all things must end, but from them new beginnings blossom, and in the night there is still hope for this forsaken land. The story of the night, meanwhile, is one of outperformance and perseverance against all odds. Often, the little knight is underestimated only to defy expectations completely and achieve the impossible. A tale of humility and that things might be more than meet the eye. Thanks so much for watching and listening to this video on the story of Hollow Knight. Now I want to hear from you. Let me know your thoughts on Hallownest, the Pale King, and the Knight's adventure, as well as suggestions for future videos in the comments below. And if you're a fan of lore and storytelling, be sure to subscribe to the channel or check out the podcast where content is uploaded frequently. A huge shout out to all of my supporters over on Patreon. Your patronage means the world to me and helps the channel grow and improve. If you're interested in becoming a lore luminary for access to me, a great community, written scripts, and early video drops, head to patreon.com/thelorebrarians to learn more. Until next time, go forth and explore the lore.